Good morning. I'm glad you could make it today. Before we dive into specifics, I want to ask, how do you feel about your time management skills right now?
Honestly, doctor, I feel like I'm constantly behind. I wake up with plans, but by the end of the day, I've barely accomplished anything.
That's actually very common. Time management isn't just about scheduling hours on a calendar. It's about managing your energy, attention, and habits. Today, we'll explore both practical strategies and the science behind why our brains struggle with focus and procrastination.
That sounds great. I've tried planning my days before, but I often fail to stick to it.
That's why understanding your brain is so important. We're not just dealing with willpower, we're dealing with neural patterns, dopamine loops, and psychological triggers. Once you understand them, planning becomes much easier and more effective. All right, let's start with the core question. When you think about your day, do you feel in control of your time, or do you feel like time controls you?
Honestly, I feel like time controls me. I wake up with good intentions, but distractions just take over, and by the end of the day, I've only done half of what I planned.
That's a common sign that your time isn't anchored to clear priorities. Psychologically, our brain will drift toward whatever gives the fastest dopamine hit, social media, random browsing, if there's no strong pre-commitment. Have you ever tried mapping your day hour by hour before it even starts?
I've tried making to-do lists, but I usually don't follow them exactly. Something unexpected comes up, and then the list feels useless.
Lists are helpful, but without time blocks, they become wish lists. Research from Cal Newport's work on deep work shows that pre-deciding when you'll do a task increases follow-through by over 80%. I once had a student who went from constantly missing deadlines to finishing early just by committing specific hours to each activity, including breaks.
I get what you're saying, but my problem is flexibility. What if something urgent pops up during my time block?
That's where the 80/20 approach to planning comes in. Schedule about 80% of your day, leave 20% as a buffer for emergencies. Psychologically, that buffer relieves anxiety. You're not breaking your plan, you're just moving into the flex zone. In my hospital days, I planned surgeries and rounds with a built-in 2-hour flex period, which saved me from daily chaos.
Okay, but I also tend to procrastinate until the last minute, especially for big tasks. How do I stop that?
Procrastination is often not about laziness. It's about avoidance of discomfort. Neurologically, your amygdala triggers stress at the thought of a challenging task, so your brain diverts you to something easier. The fix? Break the task into tiny, non-threatening steps. I had a research paper in med school that I avoided for 2 weeks until I told myself, just write the title. That tiny start lowered the mental barrier.
Yeah, I think I make my tasks too big in my head. But I also waste time deciding what to do next.
That's decision fatigue. Every choice uses mental energy. By 2 p.m., your brain's willpower reserves are depleted, so you default to easy habits. That's why successful people set up routines. They eliminate daily decision-making for small things. Steve Jobs wore the same style of clothes to save mental energy for bigger choices.
I've read about that. So I should make a fixed schedule for certain things?
Exactly. For example, fixed wake-up time, fixed breakfast, fixed start of work. This creates anchor points in your day. Once the brain associates certain hours with certain actions, you enter them almost automatically, like brushing your teeth at night.
I see. But I also get distracted by my phone, constantly. Even when I'm working, I just check it without thinking.
That's a habit loop at play. Cue, routine, reward. The cue might be boredom or difficulty. The routine is checking your phone, and the reward is a dopamine spike. You can rewire this loop by replacing the routine. When I was writing my book, Every time I felt the urge to check my phone, I'd drink a glass of water instead. After a few weeks, the impulse to grab the phone dropped dramatically.
That's interesting. But what if the distraction is part of my work, like messages from clients?
Then you batch it. Set 2 or 3 times a day to check messages. Outside those windows, keep notifications off. It's a boundary issue. The brain can't maintain deep focus if it's expecting to switch tasks every few minutes. Multitasking feels productive, but studies show it reduces output by up to 40%.
Yeah, I do feel exhausted when I'm switching tasks all day.
That's because each switch comes with a reorientation cost. Your brain takes time to reload the mental context of the previous task. Imagine closing one complex program and opening another. There's a lag. By minimizing switches, you preserve cognitive momentum.
So basically, I need to group similar tasks together?
Exactly. This is called task batching. For example, answering all emails at once, doing all phone calls in one block. In medicine, I'd review all lab results together rather than piecemeal. It saved hours each week.
I think I get the structure now. But how do I stay motivated day after day?
Motivation is unreliable. Discipline is more dependable. Psychologically, the brain responds better to systems than to bursts of willpower. A system could be a morning ritual that automatically leads you into your work zone. My ritual: coffee, review my top 3 tasks, noise-canceling headphones, and a timer. Even on low-energy days, the ritual pulls me in.
I like the idea of rituals. What about rewards? Should I give myself rewards for finishing tasks?
Definitely. Rewards activate the brain's reinforcement system, but make them proportional. Finish a 10-minute task, take a 5-minute break. Finish a big project, treat yourself to something meaningful. Just avoid rewards that sabotage progress, like binging on distractions.
Got it. Another thing. I sometimes work late into the night to catch up, but then I feel terrible the next day.
That's the sleep debt trap. Sleep deprivation impairs the prefrontal cortex, which is critical for planning and decision-making. Studies show just one night of 5 hours, sleep can reduce cognitive performance as much as being legally drunk. Your productivity plummets the next day, creating a cycle of catch-up.
So I should protect my sleep schedule like it's part of my work?
Exactly. Sleep isn't wasted time. It's maintenance time for the brain. During deep sleep, your brain clears out waste products, consolidates memory, and resets neurotransmitter balance. Without it, time management collapses.
Makes sense. But sometimes I feel like there just aren't enough hours in the day.
That feeling is usually about energy, not hours. If you manage your energy well, through rest, nutrition, exercise, you can accomplish more in fewer hours. One of my clients cut his workday from 10 hours to 7 by working in focused bursts and taking real breaks, not scrolling breaks.
I like that idea. Can you tell me more about focused bursts?
Sure. It's called the Pomodoro technique. 25 minutes of deep focus, 5 minutes of rest, repeat. After 4 cycles, take a longer 20 to 30-minute break. This leverages the brain's natural attention span and prevents burnout. Personally, I stretch or take a short walk during the breaks to refresh my mind. I'm glad you're willing to dive deeper today. Time management isn't just about schedules or to-do lists. It's essentially about managing your attention and energy. Scientifically, our brains have a finite amount of decision-making capacity each day, what psychologists call decision fatigue. If you waste that on trivial decisions, you'll have less willpower for important tasks. That's why routines and systems matter. They automate the small stuff so you can focus on the big goals.
That's interesting because I never thought about the mental energy part. I just assumed I was bad at time management because I get distracted easily. But now that you mention decision fatigue, I realize I do spend a lot of time in the morning deciding what to eat, what to wear, even what task to start with. By the time I sit down, I already feel behind. How do you personally reduce decision fatigue?
In my case, I batch decisions whenever possible. For example, I wear similar clothes every day, not identical, but close, so I don't waste time choosing outfits. I meal prep on Sundays, so breakfast and lunch are predetermined. It might sound boring, but here's the thing. Every time I skip a decision, I save a drop of mental fuel for something important. Neuroscience research backs this. Your prefrontal cortex, which controls planning and decision-making, gets depleted throughout the day. That's why many people can work hard in the morning, but crumble by the afternoon.
That actually explains my afternoons perfectly. I always crash around 3 p.m. and end up scrolling on my phone. So is the solution to schedule my most important tasks earlier in the day?
Exactly. This is called energy matching. You want to align your highest energy hours with your most cognitively demanding work. For most people, that's morning to late morning, but it varies. For example, I once coached a designer who did her best work at night because she was naturally a night owl. We tracked her energy levels for 2 weeks, then built her schedule around that rhythm. Productivity skyrocketed.
Okay, but what about unavoidable things, like meetings that pop up in my peak hours? I feel like my schedule gets hijacked all the time.
That's where boundaries come in. From a psychological perspective, your time is like property. You have to protect it. This can mean blocking focus time in your calendar, marking it as busy, and training colleagues to respect it. I learned this lesson the hard way early in my career. I used to say yes to every request, thinking it made me helpful. Instead, I ended up burnt out and resentful.
I'm guilty of that too. I say yes because I don't want to seem rude, but then my own work suffers. How do you handle that without feeling guilty?
It's about reframing. Saying no to one thing is actually saying yes to something else, usually something more aligned with your priorities. When you understand your personal why and long-term goals, it becomes easier to protect them. For example, when I was writing my first book, I declined 70% of meeting requests. I told people I was on a writing deadline, and most respected that. The guilt faded when I saw the progress I was making.
That makes sense. I think my problem is I don't have a clear set of priorities, so everything feels equally urgent.
That's very common. A tool I recommend is the Eisenhower matrix, splitting tasks into urgent versus important. Urgent things scream for your attention, like emails or small requests. Important things are quieter but create real value, like skill building or strategic planning. The trap is spending your life in the urgent zone. Once you see the difference, you can intentionally shift more time toward important, non-urgent work.
I can see how that would help. But how do I break the habit of checking my phone every 5 minutes? It's like my brain craves that little dopamine hit.
The phone. The pocket slot machine. Psychologically, that's variable reward conditioning, the same principle used in gambling. You don't get a notification every time you check, so your brain keeps checking in hopes of a reward. Breaking it requires both environment design and habit replacement. For instance, I keep my phone in another room when I'm doing deep work. I also replace the impulse with a quick stretch or a sip of water. Over time, the craving fades.
That's tough, but doable. I guess part of it is admitting I'm not as good at multitasking as I think I am.
Absolutely, and there's strong science behind that. Multitasking actually reduces productivity by up to 40%, according to Stanford research, because your brain has to context switch. Each switch comes with a cognitive cost, meaning it takes time and energy to reorient yourself. You feel busy but achieve less. I once had a client who insisted she was a great multitasker. We tracked her time for a week. Turns out she was spending 30% more time on tasks than she estimated because of constant switching.
Wow, I've been doing that for years. No wonder I'm exhausted by the end of the day. So what's the fix? Just do one thing at a time?
Yes, but with intentional structure. I use the single task sprint method. Set a timer for 25 to 50 minutes, work on just one thing, then take a short break. It's similar to the Pomodoro technique, but more flexible. The key is to remove all other temptations during that sprint. Close tabs, silence notifications, even put up a do not disturb sign if needed.
That might actually work for me. But what about motivation? Some days I just don't feel like starting anything.
Motivation is tricky. It often follows action, not the other way around. Waiting to feel like it is a trap. Psychologically, the Zeigarnik effect tells us that starting a task creates mental tension that pushes you to continue. That's why I use the 2-minute rule. Commit to just 2 minutes of a task. Often, once you start, momentum carries you forward.
I think I've heard of that. Like telling yourself you'll just write one sentence, and then you end up writing a page.
Exactly. I used it when I was procrastinating on my PhD dissertation. I'd tell myself, just write one paragraph. On bad days, that was all I did. But most days, it led to an hour of writing. The trick is to make the starting point so small, it's impossible to refuse.
That's actually encouraging. I tend to set huge goals for the day, get overwhelmed, and then do nothing.
That's a classic perfectionism trap. Perfectionism is often fear in disguise, fear of not meeting your own high standards, so you delay starting. The cure is to focus on progress over perfection. In behavioral psychology, this is called lowering the activation threshold, making it easy to begin and forgiving yourself for imperfect results.
I can relate to that a lot. I've been putting off starting a personal project for months because I want it to be perfect.
Let me share a story. A photography teacher split his class into 2 groups. One would be graded on the quantity of photos taken, the other on the quality of their single best photo. By the end, the quantity group produced the best photos because they practiced, learned, and improved along the way. Waiting for perfection means missing the learning process entirely.
That's a powerful example. I guess I need to start taking more imperfect shots in my own work.
Exactly. And when you combine that mindset with solid time management strategies, you create a compounding effect. Each small, consistent action builds momentum, reduces stress, and frees up more time for what matters. That's when you stop feeling like you're chasing the clock and start feeling like you're in control of it. You know, one thing I notice in many students is that they underestimate the role of mental energy management and time management. They think it's just about the clock, but in reality, your brain works in cycles. You have periods of high focus, usually in the morning for most people, and then your cognitive capacity declines. I've coached CEOs who started restructuring their day based on their mental prime time instead of just following a rigid schedule, and their productivity skyrocketed.
That's interesting, because I usually try to force myself to study late at night after I've already been on my phone for hours, and then I get frustrated because I'm tired. So are you saying it's better to match my most difficult tasks with the times I have the most energy, rather than trying to be productive all day?
Exactly. There's a principle in neuroscience called the ultradian rhythm. It's basically your body's 90-minute cycles of alertness and fatigue. If you align your focus tasks with those natural peaks, and then take real breaks during the dips, you can get more done in less time. I used to write research papers early in the morning from 7 to 9 a.m. because that's when my focus was razor sharp, and I'd save email replies for my low energy hours in the afternoon.
That makes sense. I think my peak focus time might actually be late morning, around 10 or 11 a.m., but I usually waste it scrolling on social media. How do I even start protecting that time from distractions?
First, you need to define it as a non-negotiable appointment with yourself. Treat it like you would a meeting with your boss. You wouldn't cancel last minute or show up late. Then, physically remove temptations. In psychology, we call this choice architecture, designing your environment so the right choice is the easiest one. For me, when I was working on my PhD, I would literally unplug my Wi-Fi router during my morning writing session so I couldn't check the news or email.
That's extreme, but I guess it works. I feel like my problem is that I tell myself, I'll just check my phone for a minute, but then suddenly 45 minutes are gone.
That's because you're dealing with dopamine loops. Social media platforms are engineered to keep you engaged by giving you unpredictable rewards, much like slot machines. Your brain gets addicted to that quick hit of novelty. The trick is to replace that habit loop with something equally rewarding but productive. For example, instead of checking your phone when you feel the urge, you could get up, stretch, and jot down one quick idea for your project. You're still giving your brain novelty, but in a constructive way.
I've tried to replace phone time before, but I always go back to it. Is it just a matter of willpower?
Willpower is like a muscle. It fatigues if you rely on it all day. In fact, there's a whole body of research on ego depletion showing that if you're constantly resisting temptation, you'll eventually give in. That's why habit design works better than pure discipline. For example, when I was studying for my medical board exams, I put my phone in another room entirely and worked in 25-minute sprints using the Pomodoro technique. It wasn't that I had superhuman self-control. I just made it easier to do the right thing.
I've heard of the Pomodoro technique, but I've never actually tried it seriously. Does it really make that big of a difference?
Immensely. It's not magic. It works because it plays into your brain's preference for short, achievable goals. You tell yourself, I only have to focus for 25 minutes, and that lowers the mental barrier to starting. Plus, the regular breaks prevent burnout and keep your concentration sharp. When I coached a startup founder last year, he doubled his output just by structuring his day into 4 90-minute focus blocks, with real breaks in between.
I think my problem is also that I try to plan my entire day perfectly, but if something goes wrong early on, I feel like the whole plan is ruined.
That's the all-or-nothing trap. It's a cognitive distortion where you think that if you can't follow your plan perfectly, it's not worth trying at all. Psychologically, it's better to think of your plan as a compass, not a train schedule. A compass gives you direction, but allows flexibility when life throws curveballs. For example, if a patient emergency disrupted my morning back when I worked in a busy hospital, I would still salvage part of my plan by shifting key tasks to later time slots, rather than scrapping the day entirely.
I like that analogy. I guess I need to stop being so rigid. But I also struggle with procrastination, especially on tasks I don't enjoy.
That's incredibly common. Procrastination isn't just laziness. It's often a form of emotional avoidance. Your brain associates the task with discomfort, so you seek something immediately rewarding instead. One trick is to break the task into ridiculously small steps, so there's no mental resistance. For instance, if you need to write an essay, step 1 could be just opening a blank document. Step 2, write 1 sentence. I once had a patient who was avoiding exercising, so we started with her just putting on her sneakers each morning. Within weeks, she was doing full workouts.
So basically tricking your brain into starting?
Exactly. There's a saying in behavioral science, action precedes motivation. People think they need to feel motivated before starting, but often it's the act of starting that generates motivation. In fact, brain scans show increased dopamine release once you begin a task, not before.
That's actually encouraging. But what about when I have multiple important tasks and I don't know which to start with?
That's where prioritization frameworks come in. One I often recommend is the Eisenhower matrix, separating tasks into 4 categories: urgent and important, important but not urgent, urgent but not important, and neither urgent nor important. When I ran a clinic, we used this daily to decide which patient cases needed immediate attention versus which administrative tasks could be scheduled later. It reduces decision fatigue, which is a major cause of wasted time.
Decision fatigue. That's when you make worse decisions after making too many in a row, right?
Correct. Studies show that judges, for example, are more likely to deny parole later in the day, simply because they're mentally drained from making decisions all day. By pre-deciding your priorities in the morning, you conserve mental energy for actually doing the work, instead of constantly debating what to do next. Another thing that often goes unnoticed is how the perceived difficulty of a task influences whether we start it or delay it. Psychologists call this the activation energy of a task. If something feels big and overwhelming, your brain will try to protect you from discomfort by steering you toward easier, less important activities. That's why breaking tasks into smaller, bite-sized pieces works so well. It lowers that mental barrier and makes it easier to just get started.
That makes sense. Sometimes I look at a project and think, this is going to take all day, and I immediately feel drained before I've even started. So instead, I'll check my phone, scroll social media, and suddenly an hour is gone.
Exactly. And that hour wasn't stolen. You gave it away because the brain prefers short-term comfort over long-term reward. This is tied to what's called temporal discounting in behavioral economics. We undervalue rewards that are further in the future compared to rewards we can have now. When you scroll, you get instant dopamine hits, but working on a report might only give you satisfaction hours later. Training your brain to choose the longer-term reward takes conscious effort.
So how do I train myself? I've tried just telling myself don't check your phone, but I always end up caving.
One powerful method is the friction approach. You make distractions harder to access and productive tasks easier to start. For example, put your phone in another room or inside a drawer before starting work. At the same time, set up your work area so that your tools, notes, or files are already open and ready. This way, the path of least resistance leads toward productivity.
That reminds me, I sometimes open my laptop with the best intentions, but then a notification from my email or social media grabs my attention, and I'm gone for 20 minutes before I even notice.
Notifications are like tiny time thieves. Each one doesn't just take the seconds you spend reading it, it takes minutes to regain your original focus. This is called attention residue. After switching tasks, part of your mind stays stuck on the last one, which lowers your performance on the new task. That's why I keep my phone on silent and disable desktop notifications when I need deep focus.
Attention residue. I've never heard of that, but it explains why I feel sluggish after checking messages.
Absolutely. Cal Newport talks about this in his work on deep work. He argues that in order to produce high-quality results in less time, you need stretches of uninterrupted focus. Even an hour or two can make a huge difference. And it's not just about output. Deep work can also be deeply satisfying because it puts you in a state of flow.
Flow. I've had that when I'm drawing or playing games. Time disappears, and I'm just in it.
Exactly. Flow is that sweet spot where the challenge matches your skill level, and you're fully engaged. It's incredibly productive and also very enjoyable. Time management isn't only about doing more. It's about structuring your day so you can enter flow more often. That's when your best work happens.
But what if I can't get into flow because I'm stressed about deadlines?
Then the first priority is to reduce cognitive load, meaning you need to clear mental clutter. This can be as simple as writing down everything on your mind, so your brain isn't holding it all. The Zeigarnik effect tells us that unfinished tasks create mental tension. Once you externalize them into a trusted system, your mind can relax enough to focus.
So like a to-do list?
Yes, but with structure. A random list can still overwhelm you. I suggest using the next actions approach from David Allen's Getting Things Done. Instead of writing, prepare presentation, which is vague, write draft outline for presentation slides as your next action. Clear. Specific steps remove ambiguity, which reduces procrastination.
I think I get it. Big goals need small steps, and those steps should be clear enough that I can just do them without thinking too much.
Perfectly said. Decision fatigue is real. Every time you have to decide what to do next, you burn mental energy. By planning steps ahead of time, you conserve that energy for the actual work.
That's probably why I feel so drained after a chaotic day, even if I didn't get much done.
Right, because constant context switching and micro decisions are mentally exhausting. This is why routines are powerful. They automate parts of your day so you don't have to think about them. Morning routines, for example, help you start in a predictable way and conserve willpower for later.
I've tried morning routines, but I usually get bored or give up after a few days.
That's a common trap. People often copy someone else's routine instead of designing one that fits their life. My own morning routine evolved over years. I wake up, hydrate, stretch for 5 minutes, then review my top 3 priorities for the day. It's simple, but it anchors me. I also allow flexibility so it doesn't feel like a rigid chore.
So it's about finding what works for you instead of forcing a perfect plan.
Exactly. The best routine is the one you'll actually stick to. And you don't have to overhaul your life overnight. Small, consistent changes compound over time. That's the psychology of habit formation. The more you repeat a behavior in the same context, the stronger the habit loop becomes.
Habit loop. That's cue, routine, reward, right?
Yes. A cue triggers the behavior, the routine is the action itself, and the reward reinforces it. If you want to build a habit like starting work on time, identify a cue, say, finishing your morning coffee. Then pair it with your routine, opening your project file, and give yourself a small reward, listening to a favorite song, after you complete a chunk of work.
I like that. It feels more doable than just try harder.
Motivation is unreliable because it's an emotion. It fluctuates. Habits and systems keep you moving even when motivation is low. Think of it like brushing your teeth. You don't need a burst of inspiration to do it because it's automatic.
You're making me realize I rely too much on waiting to feel ready.
That's one of the biggest productivity myths, that you need to feel ready before starting. In reality, starting creates readiness. Your brain warms up as you work, not before. It's like waiting for motivation to exercise. Often, you feel motivated after you've started moving.
That explains a lot. I usually feel better after I start, but I keep forgetting that.
That's why I suggest the 5-minute rule. Commit to doing something for just 5 minutes. Most of the time, you'll keep going once you've begun, because momentum kicks in.
That sounds doable. I could apply that to my writing assignments.
Exactly. In fact, would you like me to share a personal story of how I used this to finish a massive project under a tight deadline?
Yes, please. I think hearing real examples helps me remember.
A few years ago, I had to write a 60-page research paper in just 2 weeks while still teaching full-time. The thought of writing 60 pages was paralyzing. So I set a rule. Every morning, I would write for just 10 minutes, no matter what. Most days, those 10 minutes turned into an hour or more. The small, low-pressure start made it easy to begin, and soon I was ahead of schedule. I finished early, stress-free, and with better quality than usual, because I avoided the panic mode of last-minute work.
That's inspiring. I can see how it could work for my projects too.
So after everything we've discussed today, routines, focus blocks, habit loops, handling procrastination, and energy management, what's your biggest takeaway?
I think I've realized that it's not about being perfect or waiting to feel motivated. It's about starting small, using systems, and protecting my focus. Also, planning my day according to my energy level seems really important.
Exactly. And remember, the goal isn't to control every minute, but to create an environment where the right actions happen naturally. Consistency beats intensity in the long run.
I feel more confident now. I even think I can implement a morning routine and use the 5-minute rule to overcome procrastination.
That's the spirit. And don't forget to reflect at the end of each week. See what worked, what didn't, and adjust. Time management is an ongoing skill, not a one-time fix.
Thank you, Doctor. I really feel like I have a practical roadmap now. I appreciate all the tips, stories, and explanations.
You're welcome. Remember, it's a journey. Small, deliberate steps compound over time, and soon you'll find yourself achieving more with less stress. Keep tracking your progress. Stay curious about your habits, and you'll be amazed at how much control you can reclaim over your time.